Hi everyone, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce myself and so that you could see my face. During the keynote, you're not actually going to, all you're going to see is the screen. But I just wanted to go over a couple of things before we get started. The first one is I want you guys to know that I recognize that I am an administrator. So I want you to know that this presentation, my thought was not to make you guys feel like you had to pile on and completely change the way that you've been teaching. The idea behind it is to make teaching reading fun for you again. And so to alleviate some of that stress of feeling like you have to get through every single unit and get through every single resource, I want you guys to know that you don't have to do that. And so again, I just really want reading to be fun for you again. I will be monitoring the chat. So number one, please be nice. And number two, if you have questions, you can put them there. And know that everything I'm going to be talking about, I'll be sharing the Padlet with you, and it's attached to the presentation. So you can find a lot of things that I talk about in the Padlet as well. Again, if you have questions, throw them in the chat. But I'm just so glad that all of you are here, and I really hope that you get some sort of tidbit of information, maybe an aha moment, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. So wonderful to meet you all, and away we go. Hello everyone, and welcome to ITCC. Hope you've had a wonderful morning of learning. My name is Allison Woodsa de Carrillo, and I will be bringing to you a keynote on bringing literacy to life. So excited to be here. I love reading. I've always loved reading. My students know that, my teachers know that, and I think it's one of the most important things that we can do as educators. I hope today that you'll get some tidbits here that will blow your mind. I am excited to share some tips and tricks for making literacy fun again. But first, we are going to go over some entertaining memes that I think we can all relate to. How many of those people in your building are those Pinterest people? My next one, especially for all of you since you're here today, handing out that PD credit for all of you. Also can't go wrong when you get asked to be called on while you're in a presentation. Don't worry, I will be doing that minimally. Just have a couple of competitions actually coming up. This is for all of you Game of Thrones fans. I know I feel like this every single day, especially since we came back on the 19th. This is a great one, and you have to admit, as an administrator, this is the look you get also as soon as you walk in and teachers are in their small groups. Gotta love me some Elf, and I have to admit, if I walk in on this, I want to participate. Now, for any admin out there as well, this has been real for all of us. Definitely a tricky situation. And here we go. I wonder how many of you are a little bit more freaked out by lice than you are by COVID at this point. It's probably pretty close. And I know grading is coming up, so, a little Friends humor here for you. Some Tony Stark. Let's face it, we all know who these students are. You can picture them in your mind right now. And finally, this is where our first competition is going to come in. So you see the 468 notifications on your Seesaw. For those of you who use Google Classroom or Schoology, however you receive notifications, please either type in the chat or send us a message about how many notifications you have. And whoever has the most, I will have a prize for you, and I will send it to you via email. So it's the Seesaw Notification Challenge. So now, everyone, we're going to get into kind of that traditional definition of what literacy engagement is. This is from the Literacy Essentials: deliberate research-informed efforts to foster literacy motivation and engagement within and across lessons. Well, if we're being honest, that is not necessarily very engaging for us either. And while the real deal is a lot more fun, just simply have fun with reading and use themes to create engagement. So we're going to kind of take the traditional definition, but move into the real deal today. So for those of you who use ReadyGen, and even if you don't, you get the same idea. Most of us use a basal of some sort or another. Just thinking about all these different things, the enduring understandings, the knows, the do's, the language objectives, content objectives, that's just a lot to try and consider when you're doing a lesson. One of the things I do like is when you have really great stories, though. So if you have a good anchor text, if you have a good story for your students, you can really take that a long ways. And so that's really what we're going to focus on here. I think some of the closed read information that you can get, these questions are pretty stellar. You can see how they go from DOK1 to getting more complex. So I think these are always a really great start. You look at these lesson pages, oh boy, it gives me a headache just to look at. Same thing here. What I do want to point out is you'll notice that in a lot of the instructional focuses, they repeat though. So that's something we're going to think about a little bit further on. Now here's all the vocab you're supposed to consider. And let me tell you, it's way too much. So I give you permission now not to use all of those. And then you get your center options, which honestly, I do really like kind of the idea behind these, and we'll dive in a little bit more later. But really, all of this is just so much to think about. It really makes me sweat a little bit. And a lot of that stuff is skills-based. It's, finding the main idea, just things that aren't intriguing. That's not what kids are going to be excited about. So I did the work, as if I were going to be doing this lesson plan. And this is kind of what my brain ended up with. And it just is very chaotic. So really what I wanted to do is kind of take a look at something and make it more fun and more manageable to handle. So when you think about it, I think one thing that we kind of forget about is, if we don't like planning for reading, then our students probably aren't going to like learning about it either. And right now, planning is especially brutal because we have a new curriculum and we're in the middle of a pandemic. So it's extra hard. One thing I want to acknowledge before I get started on some of my ideas and tips and tricks and suggestions is that I know time is always an issue. Keynotes are wonderful. They can be inspiring, but sometimes you leave and you think to yourself, well, I'll never actually have time to do any of that. I love those ideas, but it's just not realistic. So I'm really hoping that you guys will find things here that you can embrace and that you feel like you can get done. And just remember, the idea is start a little bit at a time. So even if there's one thing in these next few slides that you think you can get something out of, just start with that one thing. Don't feel like you have to tackle it all at the same time. The first and most important thing, though, is this idea of picking a theme. Instead of thinking about all the skills that you have to teach in a lesson, what I want you to start with is the theme. So look at those anchor texts of your main stories and think about the themes and create your essential question based around that. It's going to be so much more fun, even just to start. So I actually dug into a ReadyGen lesson, and I'm going to help kind of recreate that for you guys today. So instead of saying that the lesson is about main idea and details, what I decided to play upon is this idea of friendships and relationships. So how do living things depend on one another to survive and thrive? And the most important thing is instead of thinking about the test at the end of the unit, we're going to think of this project. Pick two living things and create a story about how they grow together. Think of an example from your own life. So this is going to make it a lot more fun. The project, the challenge is open, so students can do it in a way that works for them. Some will create videos, some will do a physical drawing or a book, and just that, that's going to open it up so much more for them. And so on day one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have them listen to a story on Epic about two friends and how their friendship develops over the school year. We're going to have a Padlet where after we read together, we're going to be able to write down ideas and words together and keep going back to that so we remember. Then we're going to take a look at a video about how living things need each other to survive. So plants and animals and how they need each other and their importance. And then we're going to look at bats because our anchor text is about Stella Luna. So we want the students to have some background knowledge about bats as well. And then we'll get into our anchor text, which is Stella Luna. And I've linked here a YouTube read aloud because there are other people out there who are better at doing read alouds than me. And since we know some people are virtual, it's even easier to just plop in this link and have students doing that work. So as you can see here, today is really about content. It's about getting students excited about the theme of relationships and what that means to them. So now you're thinking about your small groups. So again, the most important thing is you're thinking about this idea of friendships and relationships still. You're thinking about Stella Luna. I love to give examples for students about kind of what that project could look like as well, and then have them decide for themselves. But we're going to look at our 4 groups here. And what you'll notice is my groups aren't, you're going to go to the station for main idea, you're going to go to the phonics station. The groups are named after the different characters in the story that they're reading. And the theme behind each group is something fun for the students. So they have a scavenger hunt, they have a what's missing, they have a story time, and they have tongue twisters. So again, they're going to go into this group thinking about the story and the activities rather than all these skills that they need. And so I've given you here, ideas for activities and then also some scaffolds as well. And so, some of you may think that this would work and some of you may think that some of these won't work. Again, it's just kind of some ideas to get your brain going. One thing I do want you to know though is when you look at story time is going to end up being what gets them to their final project or their final challenge. And so this is a perfect example of them to be able to do that PBA, their final writing project. They're going to work on it a little bit every day. And it's going to be their final challenge for the end of the unit as well. So that just kind of makes your life a little bit easier. And it's one less day of, quote unquote, testing that you have to do at the end of a unit. And then at the end of a day, I always love to do a share out, shout out. So students can share something they did in one of their groups. They can shout out a classmate. And it's just a really positive thing to do. Now, kind of thinking about the next days, you're going to still have, your main idea, your main theme of friendships and relationships. You're going to continuously go back to the challenge. I actually have linked here an example of a final project that I did as an example for you guys. And so now everyone, let's take a look at our recap. So I would make sure to go over what we did on the other days with our students. And of course, to our Padlet, we would continue to add ideas as the unit progresses. So just as our reminder, now that we're kind of in day 2 lessons, we would reread Stella and we would make sure to focus on a smaller section for our close reading. And then you can kind of continue to plan for your small group work. One of the cool things is that there are some really great anchor texts and leveled texts to work with. So what I would do is after a couple of days, we're going to move from Stella Luna and then we're going to continue with Frog and Toad Together. Epic is another way. If you're not a huge fan of the anchor text, then you might be able to find something in Epic, or you might have something in your own library that you really like to work with. So now, thinking about our groups, you're going to see that they're super similar to what you saw before. So we've got those same ideas here. So you've got your scavenger hunt, your note the rainbow, your story time. So I did change some of the names of the groups. But again, they're slightly different activities. They're going to build, yes, on those skills that we're supposed to cover, but they're all related to our reading. So either Stella Luna or our Frog and Toad book, and just make it a little bit more real for the students. And then finally, once again, in Flap and Story Time, they're just adding to that final challenge, that final project. And then, of course, we're going to share out, shout out. So now I know that, like I mentioned before, time is a huge issue for all of us, and I absolutely recognize that. So, what I want you to do is to brainstorm with your principal. And if any of you out there are administrators, I also welcome you to kind of brainstorm how you can make this happen. But making sure you have time with your grade level team. So, can staff meetings include 30 minutes of planning time? Can people help cover classroom once a month so grade levels can meet? It's essential that you figure out some time to do this work. And really, one of the important things, though, is if you're going to get the time, then you need to work smarter, not harder. So, how can you share work with your grade level team? And if you find someone, or if you're alone, find someone at another school. You'd be surprised. Everyone is pretty eager to work together. So, maybe you're the one who creates your background knowledge slide. Someone else is going to come up with the work for small groups. So you guys, the more you can work together, the better. I know a lot of time is taken up by assessments and district expectations. So one piece of advice I have is just chunk them out. Do a little bit out of a time, and then have students reflect on glows and grows after big assessments. Third grade and up, you might want to think about how much you chunk it out because they are going to need some stamina, but just know that that is definitely an option. And then for those of you who are virtual, and then just kind of in general, some good scaffolds are making things have smaller chunks, make sure it's visual, audio, and kinesthetic, and then gamifying. So we're going to look a little bit more into gamifying here a little bit later. So now one of the big things that we've looked at is, or we've thought about over this past year, especially, is the use of technology. And one thing, because I'm a technology nut, is if you're using technology, if it's not doing one of these three things, you probably shouldn't be using it. So if what you've created is not more engaging for the students, I wouldn't necessarily use it. If it's not enhancing or extending their knowledge or their interaction with the content, I wouldn't use it. And so, it won't be all three of these 100% of the time, but I really do encourage you guys to keep this in mind. Just having technology for the sake of technology to take tests and write papers is not the point. So please try and consider these three things as you're moving forward, and especially if and when we are back to normal next year. So now, one thing that I have created is a huge Padlet. I know that we have teams and we have kind of some ELA sections for teams, but I encourage you guys to check out this Padlet. I have included lots of resources about some of the things that I've been talking about. I have templates for you on there. And I also welcome you to put your name and your grade level. So that way, if someone is in a silo, someone's the only person at their grade level in their school, they can kind of reach out to you and you can have a planning buddy, because I know they would appreciate it. And this idea of just collaborating together is always going to be so, so important. So now we're going to go over some of my favorite tech resources that I think can create really engaging literacy lessons. Clips is my absolute favorite. If you have an iPhone or an iPad, you can use this, and it is so much easier than you probably realize. Seesaw is great. What I want to remind everyone is use the community. So many people have already done the work, and so why not look at it, make a copy, and then use it. Pear Deck and Nearpod are wonderful. They have free options and are very interactive for students. We all know about Epic, I'm guessing, but what can be helpful is to pre-create reading lists to send to your students for each unit, and then do like a Pizza Hut sort of challenge when students are able to do the reading and then do some reflection based on that reading. Again, kind of saving yourself some time. Use YouTube for your read alouds. Flipgrid is also great. I know my 3rd through 5th grade teachers really like using it. Book Creator is also fabulous and free. So if you want your students to create books for each unit based on whatever your theme is, that can definitely be helpful. And virtual field trips are great. I know Nearpod has them, but a lot of museums now have virtual field trips online as well. So that can also be helpful and can also be considered part of your theme. Remember, science and social studies can be integrated into ELA. So really, to wrap it all up, I just want you guys to remember, instead of worrying about the skills repeat. I want you to pick a theme, okay? You can consolidate. If you can't get through all the units, that's okay, because everything repeats itself. So pick the themes, the units that are going to be most interesting for your students and that you're going to be excited about teaching, and do those. Just make sure you're including those skills and make sure you're hitting them throughout the year. The next thing is consolidate. So this is kind of along the lines of what I was just saying. A lot of what we see in our basals repeats itself throughout the unit, so you can consolidate, and you are free to do so. I even asked some district admin, I asked Roseanne, and she gave me the go-ahead to tell you guys this. Make groups of games. We talked about gamifying, and there's more information about gamifying in the Padlet, but make them exciting. Don't make them skill based. You can be doing skills in them, but you got to kind of trick the students into thinking they're doing something else. And then for your PBAs and your end of the unit writing, do projects. Make them exciting for the students and give students options within those projects. And then finally, my last piece of advice is work smarter, not harder. Work together. Your job is hard enough as it is, and we want to figure out ways to make it more fun for you and to make it a little bit easier too. So as I've kind of run through all of these ideas, I really just want to say, please feel free to reach out. I'm here for you. My staff is here for you, but feel free to shoot me an email, message me on Twitter, or even add me on Facebook. Like I said, I hope you've gotten a little something out of this. I appreciate your time, and I know I certainly look forward to seeing you guys in the rest of the sessions. Have a great one, and remember, bring literacy to life.